So today I'm going to be doing what is one of my favorite videos to film for the entire year, and that is my favorite books that I read in 2017. These are not necessarily books that came out in 2017, but these are all books that I read in 2017 and absolutely loved. I will link all of my previous favorites videos down in the description if you want to find out the books that I loved in the years past, but today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 books that I loved in 2017. Number 10 on my list is The Unseen World by Liz Moore. This is a literary fiction novel about a young girl named Ada who has been raised by her single father her whole life. He is this really eccentric guy. He's always kind of raised her on his own. He's taken her to his science lab. She's never really gone to a real school. But pretty early on in the book, Ada realizes that something's going on with her dad, and it causes her to have to grow up a lot faster than she should have. This is an incredibly smart book, and it is really enjoyable. It's a relatively lengthy book, but it's a really quick read, and I really liked it. As I was reading it and right after I finished it, I thought that this would be in like my top 5 of the year. I loved it so much. But as the years gone on, I found myself enjoying other books more, and I don't know if this one has stuck with me as well as I would have wanted it to. Obviously, I still really enjoyed it, and it is on my top 10 of the year list, but it's one that I maybe wish could have been a little bit higher. Number 9 on this list is a book that I actually read relatively recently, and that is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second book in the Court of Thorns and Roses series, which I read right at the end of November and beginning of December. The first book in this series is a Beauty and the Beast retelling about a girl named Feyre who has to go live in the fairy realm after she accidentally kills a fairy, and the second book takes place after the events of the first one, so obviously I can't tell you too much about this one. I just got really addicted to this series, and I found myself enjoying it much more than I thought I would, and the second book absolutely blew me away. And so even though it is a relatively recent read, I am including it on my favorites list because I really loved it, and I just didn't want to stop reading it once I started. I mean, it's a huge book. It was like a 24-hour audiobook, and I finished it in like 2 days. So I loved this book, I love the series, and I had to include it on my favorites. Number 8 is a book that actually was one of the very first books that I read in 2017, and that was The Enchanted by Renee Denfeld. This is another literary fiction novel about a prison, and it's told in kind of this omniscient point of view from an inmate in the prison. He's on death row, and the story basically follows a woman who is an investigator for attorneys trying to get their clients off of death row, and a priest who has recently fallen from the church. And it has some magical realism elements, and it has a lot of depth to it. Even though it's a relatively short book, it packs such a punch, and I found myself going back and thinking about it many times throughout this year, and I'm really glad that it actually was one of the books that kicked off my reading year because it stuck with me the whole year, and it's made my favorites list, and I can't wait to read more from Renee Denfeld in the future. Number 7 is another nonfiction book. It's another memoir, and that is In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. This is Yeonmi Park's story about her time growing up in North Korea and her subsequent escape to China and then eventually to South Korea. And I don't really know how to explain this book other than it's just so gut-wrenching but hopeful at the same time. It's really sad, but it is kind of happy, and it gives you a lot of confusing emotions, but it's mostly just a really powerful story, and it is a true story, which makes it all the more heartbreaking. And it's just so sad to know that there are people that are living in North Korea under such harsh restrictions, and they don't know that there is a whole world of people outside of North Korea that cares about them and sympathizes for them. And this book just kind of opens your eyes to something that honestly I can't even imagine, and I'm really glad that I read it this year. Number 6 is a book that I have not shut up about since I finished reading it, and that is Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna McGuire. This is the first book in the Wayward Children series, and this book follows a bunch of people who have gone into magical world, like Alice fell down the rabbit hole and the kids in Narnia went through the wardrobe. But this book follows a bunch of those kids and them going to their world, and then for some reason having to come back to our world, and they are struggling to cope, and so their families send them to Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children. And the main character of this book is a girl named Nancy who has recently come back from the halls of the dead, and she is desperate to go back. And also in this book there is a little bit of a murder mystery, and it's just so whimsical and fun and so unique, and I loved it so much. I finished reading this book and I just couldn't believe that a book like this exists, because isn't it every child's dream to find some magical world and get lost in something that is not reality? And I just loved it so much. So number 5 on my list is actually another nonfiction book. It's another memoir. I read quite a few memoirs this year and really enjoyed them all for the most part. But the one that I liked the most out of every memoir that I read this year was Scrappy Little Nobody by Anna Kendrick. This is Anna Kendrick's memoir, obviously about her growing up and finding stage, going and acting on Broadway, and then that leading to moving to Los Angeles and a film and television career. And I loved this so much because I love Anna Kendrick. First of all, she's hilarious, and it really translated well in this book. I listened to the audiobook, which she narrates herself, which just makes the humor come across even better. And I just really connected with a lot of the stories that she was telling about her family and her home life growing up and everything. I just really liked it. And one of the last stories in the memoir is a really personal story about the death of her grandmother. And right around the time that I read this, I had just lost my own grandmother. So I really connected with the way she explained how she was feeling, and you know, she felt really helpless, but she had to continue to live her life day to day, and it meant so much to me because it really helped me to kind of grieve and overcome what had just happened to me. And so that's why it's so high up on my list. I'm kind of getting emotional talking about it. I'm going to try not to do that. But I really liked this. If you like Anna Kendrick, this is a must read. Number 4 on my list is another second book in a YA fantasy series, but honestly, this book is kind of a stand-in for the entire series that I read earlier this year and absolutely loved. And this is just my favorite book in the series, and that is The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater. This is, of course, the second book in the Raven cycle. I inhaled this series back in the spring. I just read the first one and couldn't stop. I love it, and I love the second book the most because it focuses on my favorite character in the entire series, and that is Ronan Lynch, who is everything to me. And I just feel like if you haven't read the Raven cycle yet, what are you doing? Because it is so good. I know that it maybe isn't a series for everybody. It's this weird paranormal supernatural series. It's got this really weird writing style that maybe is a little bit difficult to connect with in the beginning, but honestly, if it's a series that you're interested in and you want to read it, check out the audiobooks because Will Patton narrates them, and he is the perfect narrator for the series. He captures the atmosphere of the whole series perfectly, and I cannot recommend the series, these audiobooks, more. It's just fantastic, and I'm so happy that I finally gave the Raven cycle a chance because now it's one of my faves. So we're getting into the top 3 books I read in 2017, and honestly, it was really hard to put these 3 books in order. These are basically all interchangeable, but the book that I put in the number 3 spot is Swimming Lessons by Claire Fuller. This is a book that really took me by surprise. I started reading it and I didn't really know what to expect, but it's about this married couple, Gil and Ingrid. Ingrid is writing letters to Gil explaining their life together, how they met and fell in love and got married and started a family, and instead of giving the letters to him, she is hiding them in all of his books. Throughout the course of the story, we kind of discover that Ingrid has written these letters and then she disappeared. She's presumed drowned, and then the book actually flashes forward quite a few years, and we're following Ingrid and Gil's youngest daughter Flora and her returning home to care for her father after he's had an accident and kind of getting caught up in the mystery of her mother's disappearance. It sounds like a mystery book, but I really feel like the mystery aspect takes a backseat to the characterization and just the way that the story develops. It's a very quiet mystery, and it's not necessarily the most satisfying mystery, but the book itself is really well written, and the characters, though mostly unlikable, are really fleshed out and have a decent character arc, and I just found myself really enjoying this. Like I said, it took me completely by surprise. I didn't really know what to expect, and I came out of it with a new favorite book, which is always a good thing. Number 2 on my list is a book that I actually don't have here because I've lent it to my mom, and that is Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. You probably already know what Big Little Lies is about because it has been very popular in the past year with the TV show coming out and Liane Moriarty's new books coming out. It's just been kind of everywhere, and so I'd be surprised if you haven't at least heard the plot of Big Little Lies. But basically, it is about these moms who all have children that recently started kindergarten, and at the beginning of the book, you find out that at a school event, someone has been murdered, but you don't know who it was that was killed, and you don't know who the murderer was. And throughout the course of the story, the events of that night kind of unfold, and you learn more and more about these characters, and It's so good. Honestly, it was kind of like candy. Like, I just didn't want to stop reading it. I think that has a lot to do with, at the time that I was reading it, I had been in this really big reading slump, and then I picked up Big Little Lies and just could not stop. And I think that it's a really well written book, and I think that it is really solid in terms of a mystery and in terms of how great these characters were. But I also think that reading it at just that right time made me love it so much more, and now I have recommended it to everybody. Like I said, my mom's reading it right now, and I am going to lend it to my best friend when I get it back from my mom, and it's just a really fantastic book. And so if you haven't read Big Little Lies, I would highly recommend it. And my absolute favorite book of 2017 was Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery, which I don't know if I should technically count it as my favorite book because it's not a new story to me. I am very familiar with the story of Anne because I've seen the Canadian miniseries so many times. But honestly, this is my first time reading the actual book. I listened to the audiobook that was narrated by Rachel McAdams, and I just loved it so much, and I forgot how much I love Anne, and I forgot how much I love this story. And so I am really, really glad that I finally read this, and I couldn't not put it as my favorite book of the year because I just enjoyed it so much. It's about a little girl, a little orphan named Anne, and she gets mistakenly adopted by a brother and sister, Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert, and she's kind of had this really hard life, but it's never really affected her. And then she just realizes the whole world can open up to her when she has a pair of people who love her, like Matthew and Marilla come to, and it's just so heartwarming and wonderful, and it's sad but happy, and just, I love it so much. So if you haven't read Anne of Green Gables, please do yourself a favor and go read this book. Go listen to the audiobook because it's fantastic, and just love it as much as I do because it's the best. So those are my favorite books that I read in 2017. I had a relatively fantastic reading year in 2017, and I can only hope that 2018 is just as great. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video and what you thought about them. Are any of these also some of your favorites? I would really love to know. Also, let me know some books that you put on your favorites list, or maybe the book that was your absolute favorite in 2017. I really love to know that as well. If you have a favorites video, let me know and I will definitely go and watch it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!